The small town of Maplewood was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody. It wasn't too big and it wasn't too small. Life there moved at a steady pace, with people waking up early for work, kids riding their bikes down tree-lined streets and neighbors chatting over fences. There was a comforting rhythm to it all, like an old song played on repeat. But sometimes, even in places like Maplewood, life throws a curveball that shakes everything, and everyone, to the core. William. Hart had lived in Maplewood his entire life. He was a man of average height, with sandy brown hair that was starting to gray at the temples. His eyes were warm and friendly, the kind that made you feel like he truly cared about what you had to say. William worked as a mechanic at the local garage, fixing cars and cracking jokes with customers. People liked him because he was honest and hard-working, the kind of guy who always lent a hand when someone needed help. But behind William's easy smile was a quiet sadness. 5 years ago, his wife Claire had passed away after a long illness. She had been the light of his life, the glue that held their family together. Without her, William struggled to keep things going, especially with 2 teenage daughters to raise. Those girls, Lily and Grace, were twins, though they couldn't have been more different from each other. Lily was bold and adventurous, always eager to try something new. She loved hiking, climbing trees, and exploring the woods behind their house. Her curly blonde hair was often tied back in a messy ponytail, and she had a laugh that could fill a room. Grace, on the other hand, was quieter and more thoughtful. She spent hours sketching in her notebook or painting pictures of the world around her. Her dark hair framed her face like a curtain, and she often seemed lost in her own thoughts. Despite their differences, the twins shared an unbreakable bond, sticking together through thick and thin. After Claire's death, William did his best to be both mother and father to the girls. He cooked dinner every night, helped them with their homework, and cheered them on at school events. It wasn't easy, but somehow they managed to make it work. The 3 of them leaned on each other, creating a little cocoon of love and support that kept them going. On the surface, it seemed like they were doing okay, but beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. William worked long hours at the garage, coming home exhausted and distant. Lily acted out sometimes, staying out late or arguing with her teachers. And Grace withdrew further into herself, spending less time with friends and more time alone in her room. Still, they carried on, doing their best to hold the pieces of their broken family together. That all changed one fateful evening in early October. The sky was heavy with clouds and rain poured down in sheets, turning the roads slick and treacherous. William had stayed late at the garage to finish a repair job, promising the girls he'd be home soon. They waited anxiously by the window, watching lightning flash across the horizon and listening to the wind howl through the trees. When William finally left the garage, he was tired and anxious to get home. He climbed into his old blue pickup truck and started the drive back to Maplewood. The storm made visibility poor, and the windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the downpour. William gripped the steering wheel tightly, squinting through the rain as he navigated the winding country road. At the same time, Lily and Grace decided to meet their dad halfway. They grabbed their coats and headed out the door, ignoring the storm and the dangers it posed. They wanted to surprise him, to let him know how much they appreciated everything he did for them, so they set off on foot, walking along the side of the road with umbrellas in hand. What happened next would haunt the people of Maplewood for years to come. As William approached a sharp bend in the road, his tires hit a patch of water and lost traction. The truck skidded sideways, then veered off the road and plunged into the swollen river below. At almost the exact same moment, Lily and Grace were crossing a narrow bridge nearby. A sudden gust of wind knocked them off balance, sending them tumbling into the raging waters below. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but it was already too late. Divers pulled William's body from the submerged truck, while search teams scoured the riverbank for the twins. Hours later, they found Lily and Grace downstream, their lifeless bodies tangled in the roots of a fallen tree. The news spread like wildfire through the town, leaving everyone in shock and disbelief. How could this happen? How could such a close-knit family be torn apart so suddenly and completely? Neighbors gathered outside the Hart home, hugging each other and crying. Teachers and classmates of Lily and Grace posted tributes online, sharing memories of their smiles and laughter. Even strangers felt the weight of the tragedy, lighting candles and leaving flowers at the edge of the river where it had happened. In the days that followed, the town came together to grieve. Friends and family packed into the Hart house, bringing casseroles and offering condolences. Margaret, William's younger sister, flew in from Chicago to help with arrangements. She hadn't seen her brother or nieces in months, and now she wished she'd visited more often. Sitting in the living room surrounded by photos of happy moments, she couldn't stop thinking about how unfair it all was. As preparations began for the funeral, people struggled to wrap their heads around the enormity of the loss. William had been a pillar of the community, someone who always put others first. And Lily and Grace, oh, those sweet girls, they still had so much life ahead of them. Everyone agreed that the service needed to honor their memory, to celebrate the joy they brought to those around them. But even as plans were made, whispers of unease began to circulate. Some said the storm that night had been unnatural, almost like it had a mind of its own. Others claimed they saw strange lights hovering above the river shortly before the accident. No one could explain it, but deep down, many felt that something about the tragedy didn't add up. And then there was Margaret. While sorting through William's belongings, she stumbled upon a stack of papers tucked away in his desk drawer. At first glance, they looked like random scribbles, symbols and phrases that didn't make sense. Phrases like "the other side" and "don't trust what you see." Margaret frowned as she flipped through the pages. What was her brother doing with these? Was he stressed, depressed, or was there something else going on that no one understood? She decided not to mention the notes to anyone, at least not yet. There were too many questions and not enough answers. For now, she focused on getting through each day, helping plan the funeral, and supporting the devastated community. But in the back of her mind, a nagging thought lingered. What if this wasn't just a tragic accident? What if there was more to the story than anyone realized? Maplewood was a town built on familiarity and routine, but now it faced something it couldn't easily explain. The deaths of William, Lily, and Grace left a hole that no amount of sympathy or remembrance could fill. And as the days ticked closer to the funeral, the sense of unease only grew stronger. Something was coming, something that would change everything. The days leading up to the funeral were a blur of activity and emotion. Margaret, William's sister, found herself at the center of it all. She had always been close to her brother, though life had pulled them in different directions over the years. Now, standing in his quiet house, she felt overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility. The home that once buzzed with laughter and warmth now felt hollow, like a shell of what it used to be. Neighbors came and went, bringing food and offering help. Some stayed to clean, while others sorted through photo albums, pulling out pictures for the memorial service. Margaret tried to focus on the tasks at hand, but her mind kept drifting back to those strange notes she'd found in William's desk. She couldn't shake the feeling that they meant something important. But every time she thought about mentioning them to someone, she hesitated. What if they dismissed her concerns? Or worse, what if they thought she was losing her mind? Margaret wasn't the only one struggling. Friends and family who had known William and the twins for years were devastated. Teachers from the girls' school stopped by to share stories of Lily's boldness and Grace's creativity. One teacher recalled how Lily had organized a fundraiser for a classmate in need, while another remembered Grace's beautiful artwork hanging in the hallway. Even strangers joined in, leaving flowers and candles outside the Hart home. It was as if the entire town was trying to hold on to the memory of the family, afraid that letting go would make the pain even harder to bear. As preparations continued, Margaret noticed little things that made her uneasy. For instance, some neighbors whispered about odd occurrences around the time of the accident. A man who lived near the river claimed he saw a shadowy figure standing on the bridge just moments before Lily and Grace fell. Another said he heard a low humming sound coming from the water, though no one else seemed to notice it. These stories sounded far-fetched, but Margaret couldn't ignore them entirely. They reminded her of the cryptic notes in William's handwriting, filling her with a growing sense of dread. The funeral itself was scheduled to take place in 2 days. Margaret met with Pastor Lewis, an older man with kind eyes and a gentle voice, to discuss the service. He assured her that everything would be handled with care and respect. "We'll honor their lives," he said softly, "and we'll give everyone a chance to say goodbye." Despite his reassurances, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She spent hours going over details with the pastor, making sure every aspect of the ceremony reflected William and the twins' personalities. They decided to include Lily's favorite song during the service and display some of Grace's paintings near the entrance. Margaret hoped these personal touches would bring comfort to those attending, even if it did little to ease her own grief. That evening, after most of the visitors had left, Margaret sat alone in the living room. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound being the occasional creak of the floorboards. She stared at the wooden box containing William's notes, which she had placed on the coffee table. Her fingers hovered over the lid, unsure whether she should open it again. Finally, curiosity got the better of her and she lifted the lid carefully. Inside, along with the papers covered in symbols and phrases, she discovered something new, a small, folded piece of paper tucked beneath the others. Margaret unfolded it slowly, her heart pounding. Written in William's familiar scrawl was a single sentence: "Don't let them bury us." Her breath caught in her throat. What did it mean? Who was them? And why shouldn't they be buried? Margaret read the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. Was this some sort of warning? Or was it just the rambling of a man under stress? She didn't know, but one thing was certain. It added another layer of mystery to an already confusing situation. Unable to sit still, Margaret paced the room, clutching the note in her hand. She considered calling Dr. Alan Carter, a retired professor of anthropology who lived nearby. He was known for his knowledge of ancient cultures and symbols, and maybe, just maybe, he could shed some light on what William had written. But part of her hesitated. If she reached out to him, it would mean admitting that she believed there was more to the story than a simple accident. Could she really do that? Before she could decide, there was a knock at the door. Startled, Margaret stuffed the note back into the box and hurried to answer it. Standing on the porch was Rachel, a close friend of Lily and Grace. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red from crying. Without saying a word, she stepped inside and collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. Margaret sat beside her, rubbing her back and murmuring soothing words. After a few minutes, Rachel calmed, down enough to speak. "I can't stop thinking about them," she choked out. "About how unfair it is. They didn't deserve this." "I know," Margaret replied softly. "None of us will ever understand why it happened." Rachel nodded, wiping her tears. Then, after a pause, she added, "There's something I need to tell you. Something weird." Margaret's stomach tightened. "What is it?" Rachel hesitated, glancing around the room as if afraid someone might overhear. "The night of the accident, I was walking home from a friend's house. It was raining and I took a shortcut through the woods. I swear I saw someone or something standing by the river. It looked human, but not quite. Its outline shimmered like it wasn't really there." Margaret's blood ran cold. "Did you tell anyone about this?" "No," Rachel admitted. "I didn't think they'd believe me. But when I heard about what happened to William and the girls, I couldn't stop wondering. What if it wasn't just an accident? What if something caused it?" The two women sat in silence, the weight of Rachel's words hanging heavy in the air. Margaret wanted to dismiss the idea, to chalk it up to grief-induced imagination. But, deep down, she knew it fit too well with everything else. The strange notes, the eerie stories from neighbors, the gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. Later that night, long after Rachel had gone home, Margaret lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep eluded her as her mind raced with questions. Who or what had Rachel seen by the river? What did William's notes mean? And most importantly, what was waiting for them at the funeral? By morning, Margaret had made up her mind. She would call Dr. Carter and ask for his help deciphering the symbols. Whatever answers they led to, she needed to know the truth, even if it turned her world upside down. The morning of the funeral dawned gray and overcast as if the sky itself was mourning. Margaret woke early, her mind heavy with thoughts of what lay ahead. She dressed quietly, choosing a simple black dress that felt both respectful and somber. The wooden box containing William's note sat on the dresser where she had left it the night before. She glanced at it briefly, then turned away, trying to push aside the unease that had settled in her chest. Outside, the streets of Maplewood were unusually quiet. Most people were already making their way to the cemetery, eager to pay their respects. Margaret drove slowly, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Every mile marker brought her closer to the service, and to whatever answers might be waiting for her there. When she arrived, the scene was solemn, but filled with love. Rows of chairs had been set up under a large white tent, shielding mourners from the drizzle that had begun to fall. Friends, family, and neighbors filed in silently, their faces etched with sadness. Margaret greeted them with a nod or a weak smile, though her heart wasn't in it. Her eyes kept darting toward the 3 coffins lined up near the gravesite, each adorned with flowers and photographs of William, Lily, and Grace. Pastor Lewis stood at the front, his Bible open in one hand. He began the service with gentle words about loss, love, and remembrance. People listened intently, some wiping away tears while others held hands for comfort. Margaret sat in the front row, clutching a tissue in trembling fingers. She tried to focus on the pastor's voice, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the cryptic note, "Don't let them bury us." What did it mean? Was it a plea, a warning, or just a meaningless fragment of her brother's grief? As the ceremony progressed, the atmosphere grew heavier. When the time came for the final goodbyes, mourners were invited to approach the coffins one last time. Margaret hesitated, unsure if she could bring herself to look inside. But eventually she rose from her seat and joined the line, moving forward step by step. When it was her turn, she paused before William's coffin first. His face looked peaceful, almost as if he were sleeping. She reached out to touch his hand, cold and still beneath the fabric of his suit. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced herself to move on to Lily's coffin next. There, her niece lay with a faint smile frozen on her lips, her curly blonde hair framing her face like sunlight. Finally, Margaret stopped at Grace's coffin, taking in the serene expression that seemed so unlike the quiet, introspective girl she had known. And then it happened. A sharp gasp rippled through the crowd behind her. Someone pointed and whispered urgently, drawing everyone's attention. Margaret turned quickly, her heart pounding. At first, she didn't understand what the commotion was about. Then she saw it. The lid of one of the coffins was slightly ajar. Panic spread among the mourners as people rushed forward to investigate. Pastor Lewis called for calm, but his voice was drowned out by the murmurs and cries of shock. Margaret pushed through the crowd, her stomach churning with dread. When she reached the open coffin, she froze, unable to believe what she was seeing. Inside was not William, nor Lily, nor Grace, but a young woman none of them recognized. Her pale face was smooth and unblemished, her features delicate and serene. She wore a simple white dress, its fabric pristine despite the circumstances. Her hands rested gently across her chest, clutching a small wooden box identical to the one Margaret had found in William's desk. For a moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with disbelief and confusion. Who was this woman? How had she ended up in a coffin meant for the Hart family? And why did she look so untouched? Margaret stepped closer, her legs feeling like lead. She stared at the mysterious woman, searching for any sign of injury or decay, but there was none. It was as if she had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. Tentatively, Margaret reached out and touched the box in the woman's hands. It was warm, almost as if it had been held recently. "What is this?" Someone in the crowd whispered hoarsely. "I don't know," another replied. "This doesn't make sense." Margaret ignored them, focusing instead on the box. With shaking hands, she pried it loose from the woman's grasp. Inside, she found a folded piece of paper, much like the one she had discovered earlier. She unfolded it carefully, her breath catching as she read the words written in William's unmistakable handwriting. She came back for us. A chill ran down Margaret's spine. She looked around at the stunned faces surrounding her, then back at the coffin. Questions swirled in her mind, but there were no answers, only more mysteries. Who was this woman? Where had she come from? And what did William mean when he said she had come back? Before anyone could react further, an undertaker stepped forward, apologizing profusely for the oversight. He explained that the coffins had been prepared separately and sealed days ago, leaving no explanation for how the wrong body had ended up in the grave plot reserved for the Hart family. Mourners murmured among themselves, speculating wildly about what might have happened. Margaret didn't join in the discussion. Instead, she clutched the box tightly to her chest, her mind racing. She knew now, without a doubt, that something extraordinary, and perhaps dangerous, was unfolding. The strange symbols, the cryptic notes, the eerie stories from neighbors, and now this. They all pointed to something beyond ordinary understanding. After the initial shock wore off, the service resumed, though the mood had shifted dramatically. People were quieter, their expressions wary rather than sorrowful. When the coffins were finally lowered into the ground, Margaret lingered behind, staring at the fresh mounds of earth. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end, that somehow William, Lily, and Grace weren't truly gone. Later that evening, Margaret returned home, exhausted but unable to rest. She placed the wooden box on the kitchen table and stared at it, her thoughts swirling like storm clouds. She thought about calling Dr. Carter again, but fear held her back. What if he dismissed her concerns? What if he thought she was imagining things? Still, she knew she couldn't ignore what had happened. Something, or someone, had crossed paths with her brother and nieces, leading to their deaths. And now, it seemed that same force had followed them even into death. Margaret opened the box once more, examining the symbols and notes inside. Each mark felt like a clue, a piece of a puzzle she desperately needed to solve. As she studied them, a new determination took root within her. Whatever this mystery was, she vowed to get to the bottom of it, for William, for Lily and Grace, and for the sake of the truth. Somewhere deep inside, she also hoped it would lead her to them. If they weren't truly gone, maybe there was a way to bring them back. The days after the funeral passed in a haze of confusion and unanswered questions. Margaret found herself unable to focus on anything else but the mysterious events surrounding her brother's death and the strange woman buried in their place. The wooden box, with its cryptic symbols and William's notes, sat on her kitchen table like an unopened door to a world she didn't understand. She couldn't stop thinking about the words, "She came back for us." Who was she? And where had William and the twins gone? Margaret knew she needed help making sense of it all. That evening, she picked up the phone and dialed Dr. Alan Carter, the retired anthropology professor who lived on the outskirts of town. He had always been a quiet man, known more for his books than his conversations, but Margaret remembered hearing that he had studied ancient cultures and their beliefs about life, death, and the unknown. If anyone could decipher the symbols in the box, it was him. Dr. Carter answered on the third ring, his voice calm and measured. "Hello? Dr. Carter, this is Margaret Hart," she began, her tone hesitant. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Margaret. How can I help you?" Margaret hesitated, unsure how to explain everything without sounding like she'd lost her mind. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, "It's about my brother, William, and his daughters. Something strange happened at their funeral. There are symbols and notes I don't understand, and I think you might be able to help me figure them out." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Dr. Carter replied, "Symbols, you say? Bring them by tomorrow morning. We'll see what we can do." Relieved, Margaret thanked him and hung up. For the first time since the accident, she felt a flicker of hope. Not because she thought everything would suddenly make sense, but because she wasn't alone anymore. Someone else would share the weight of this mystery with her. The next morning, Margaret arrived at Dr. Carter's house, a modest brick building surrounded by tall trees. He greeted her warmly and led her into his study, a room filled with shelves of dusty books and artifacts from his travels. A large desk dominated the space, cluttered with papers, notebooks, and magnifying glasses. Margaret placed the wooden box carefully on the desk, explaining everything that had happened. The strange notes, the mysterious woman at the funeral, and the unsettling feeling that something wasn't right. Dr. Carter listened intently, his sharp eyes scanning her face as she spoke. When she finished, he nodded slowly and opened the box. He spread the papers across the desk, examining each symbol and phrase with meticulous care. At first, he said nothing, his brow furrowed in concentration. But after a few minutes, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long sigh. "These symbols," he said finally, pointing to one of the markings, "belong to an ancient belief system tied to parallel dimensions, or what some might call alternate worlds. They were used by certain cultures to communicate with beings from beyond our reality." Margaret stared at him, her heart racing. "Alternate worlds? You mean, like another universe?" "In a way, yes," Dr. Carter replied. "These people believe that there are multiple layers of existence, overlapping but invisible to us. Sometimes, they thought, these layers could intersect, allowing creatures or forces from one realm to enter another." "And you think that's what happened here?" Margaret asked, her voice trembling. "That something from another world took William and the girls?" Dr. Carter hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It's possible. Your brother's notes suggest he may have encountered, or even interacted with such a force. The phrase 'don't trust what you see' implies he was aware of something others weren't, and the note saying she came back for us suggests that whatever it was, it returned for him and the twins." Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. "But why? Why would it take them?" "That part I can't answer," Dr. Carter admitted. "What I can tell you is that tampering with these kinds of beliefs, or attempting to cross between realms, can have serious consequences. Many cultures warned against it, believing that doing so could upset the balance of nature or invite danger." Margaret nodded, though her mind was already racing ahead. If there really was another world, if William and the twins were still alive somewhere beyond this one, then maybe there was a way to bring them back. She voiced this thought aloud, her voice tinged with desperation. Dr. Carter frowned, shaking his head. "You have to be careful, Margaret. These things aren't meant to be trifled with. Even if there's truth to what you're suggesting, trying to reach them could put you in grave danger." "I don't care," Margaret said firmly. "They're my family. If there's any chance they're still out there, I have to try." Dr. Carter studied her for a moment, then sighed again. "If you're determined to pursue this, I'll help you. But we need to proceed cautiously. First, we'll need to gather more information about the ritual your brother may have been involved in. There are references to similar practices in some of the texts I've studied. If we can recreate it, or at least understand it better, we might stand a chance of finding answers." Over the next few days, Margaret and Dr. Carter worked tirelessly, poring over old books and documents in search of clues. They discovered references to ceremonies designed to open portals between worlds, often requiring specific symbols, incantations, and offerings. Some accounts described successful crossings, while others ended in tragedy. It became clear that whatever path they chose, it wouldn't be easy or safe. As they delved deeper, Margaret grew increasingly convinced that William had somehow stumbled upon this knowledge. Perhaps it had started as curiosity, a way to cope with the loss of Claire. Or maybe he had been searching for something, someone, to fill the void left by her death. Whatever the reason, it seemed he had crossed a line he hadn't fully understood, drawing the attention of forces far beyond human comprehension. One evening, as they sifted through yet another dusty tome, Dr. Carter paused and looked up at Margaret. "There's something else you should know," he said quietly. "In many of these stories, crossing into another realm comes at a cost. Often someone must remain behind to maintain balance. To bring one person back, another must stay." Margaret's stomach tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if we manage to find your brother and the twins, It may not be possible to bring all of them home. Choices will have to be made. The weight of his words hit her like a punch to the chest. Could she really choose between them? Between William and Lily and Grace? The thought was unbearable, but she pushed it aside for now. She couldn't afford to dwell on what might happen later. Right now, she needed to focus on finding them. With Dr. Carter's guidance, Margaret began gathering the materials needed for the ritual. They collected candles, herbs, and stones marked with the same symbols from the box. Dr. Carter warned her repeatedly about the risks, but Margaret refused to back down. Every step forward felt like a lifeline, pulling her closer to the family she had lost. Finally, everything was ready. On a chilly night under a starless sky, Margaret and Dr. Carter drove to a secluded clearing deep in the woods. The air was thick with tension as they set up the ritual circle, arranging the items precisely as instructed. Margaret's hands shook as she lit the candles, their flames casting flickering shadows on the trees. When everything was in place, Dr. Carter turned to her. "Are you sure about this, Margaret? Once we start, there's no turning back." She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I'm sure." He nodded grimly and began chanting the incantation, his voice low and steady. Margaret joined in, repeating the unfamiliar words until they flowed naturally from her lips. The wind picked up, swirling around them as the ground beneath their feet seemed to hum with energy. Margaret closed her eyes, focusing on the image of William and the twins, willing them to come back to her. Suddenly the air grew heavy and the temperature dropped sharply. A loud crack echoed through the clearing, followed by a blinding flash of light. When Margaret opened her eyes, she saw a vortex-like portal hovering before them, its edges shimmering like liquid silver. From within came a faint voice, calling her name. It was William. Margaret stepped toward the portal, her heart pounding. Dr. Carter grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "Be careful," he hissed. "We don't know what's waiting for you on the other side." But Margaret shrugged him off, unable to resist the pull of her brother's voice. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the swirling light and vanished. When Margaret stepped into the portal, the world around her dissolved into chaos. Colors swirled like paint spilled in water, twisting and shifting in ways that made her head spin. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, pressing against her skin as though it had weight. She stumbled forward, unsure if she was walking on solid ground or floating through empty space. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to keep moving, driven by the faint sound of William's voice calling her name. "Margaret." His voice was clearer now, tinged with urgency. "You shouldn't be here." She pushed through the haze, her eyes adjusting slowly to the strange landscape unfolding before her. What she saw took her breath away. It wasn't a place she could easily describe, neither earth nor heaven, neither nightmare nor dream. The sky above was a swirling mix of purples and blues dotted with stars that pulsed like living things. The ground beneath her feet shimmered faintly, as though covered in glass or ice, yet it felt firm when she stepped on it. Strange shapes moved in the distance, their forms flickering and changing too quickly for her to make sense of them. And then she saw him. William. He stood a few yards away, his figure slightly translucent, like a photograph blurred at the edges. Beside him were Lily and Grace, their faces pale but unmistakable. They looked different somehow, not older, but altered, as if they existed, somewhere between life and death. Their expressions were a mixture of relief and sorrow, and when their eyes met Margaret's, they seemed to hold secrets too heavy to share. "William," Margaret whispered, her voice trembling. She wanted to run to him, to throw her arms around him and never let go, but something held her back, an invisible barrier that kept her rooted in place. "What is this? Where are we?" "This isn't our world," William replied softly. His voice sounded distant, as though carried on the wind. "We're somewhere else, a place between worlds." "But how did you get here?" Margaret asked, tears streaming down her face. "Why aren't you home?" William hesitated, glancing at the twins before answering. The night of the accident, something pulled us out of our world. We didn't choose this, it just happened. One moment we were fighting to stay alive, and the next... He trailed off, shaking his head. I don't fully understand it myself. All I know is that we're trapped here. Trapped? Margaret echoed, her chest tightening. Does that mean you can't come back? William exchanged a glance with Lily and Grace, who both looked down at their feet. Finally he spoke again, his tone heavy with regret. Not all of us. There's a rule, a balance. To bring someone back, someone else has to stay behind. That's why I called you here, to ask you to save the girls. No! Margaret cried, taking a step closer despite the barrier. I won't leave you behind, you're my brother. I've already made my decision, William said firmly, though his eyes glistened with unshed tears. Lily and Grace still have so much life ahead of them. They deserve a chance to grow up, to experience everything they missed out on. I've done my part. I raised them, loved them, gave them everything I could. Now it's their turn to live. But what about you? Margaret demanded, her voice breaking. Don't you deserve a second chance too? William smiled sadly. This isn't about me anymore. It's about them. Please, Margaret, let me do this for them, for Claire. She'd want the same thing. Margaret wanted to argue, to scream and fight, until William changed his mind. But deep down, she knew he was right. Claire would have wanted the twins to have a future, no matter the cost. Still, the thought of leaving William behind tore at her heart. She looked at Lily and Grace, who stood quietly beside their father, their faces filled with guilt and sadness. We don't want to leave him, Grace murmured, her voice barely audible. He saved us. And now you need to let him save you, Margaret said gently, though every word felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Turning back to William, she added, Are you sure about this? Once we cross back, there's no undoing it. I'm sure, William replied without hesitation. He reached out toward Margaret, his hand passing through the barrier like smoke. Take care of them for me. Tell them I love them, and that I'll always be watching over them. Margaret nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She turned to Lily and Grace, holding out her hands. Come on, girls, let's go home. The twins hesitated, looking at their father one last time. Then, with tears streaming down their faces, they stepped forward and grasped Margaret's hands. As soon as they touched her, the barrier disappeared, and the three of them began to move back toward the portal. Behind them, William's figure grew fainter, his smile bittersweet but resolute. I'll see you again someday, he called after them, his voice fading into the ether. Until then, take care of each other. With those final words, the portal closed, pulling Margaret and the twins back into their own world. For a moment, everything went black, and Margaret felt herself falling through emptiness. Then, with a jolt, she landed hard on the forest floor, gasping for air. Beside her, Lily and Grace lay motionless, their eyes closed as if asleep. Dr. Carter rushed to their side, his face pale with worry. Margaret, are you all right? What happened? She sat up slowly, her body aching but alive. Looking at the twins, she realized they were breathing steadily, their faces peaceful. Relief washed over her, followed by an overwhelming wave of grief. William was gone, for good this time, but he had given her the greatest gift imaginable. His daughters. They're okay, Margaret whispered, her voice hoarse. They're going to be okay. Dr. Carter helped her to her feet, his expression a mixture of awe and concern. Did you find what you were looking for? Margaret nodded, though her heart felt heavy. Yes, and I lost something too, but it was worth it. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the clearing, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that William was still with her. In the rustling leaves, the cool breeze, the quiet moments between thoughts. She clutched the wooden box tightly, knowing it would forever remind her of the sacrifice he had made. Whatever lay ahead, she vowed to honor his memory by giving Lily and Grace the life they deserved. Back in Maplewood, the town slowly began to heal. News of the twins' miraculous recovery spread quickly, sparking hope and wonder among the residents. Some dismissed it as a miracle, others whispered about forces beyond human understanding. But for Margaret, the truth was simple. Love had brought them back. Love, and the courage to let go. Still, as she tucked the wooden box away in a drawer, Margaret couldn't help but wonder if the portal had truly closed, or if something from the other side might follow them home. Life in Maplewood slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy after the twins' miraculous recovery. Margaret worked tirelessly to help Lily and Grace adjust to their new reality, though it wasn't easy. The girls remembered fragments of their time in the otherworldly realm, flickering lights, shadowy figures, and a constant hum, but they couldn't piece it all together. Sometimes they woke up screaming from nightmares that neither could fully describe. Other times they seemed distant, lost in thoughts they didn't share with anyone. Margaret tried her best to reassure them, reminding them often that they were safe now. She told them stories about William, painting him as a hero who had sacrificed everything so they could live. It was a bittersweet narrative, but it helped ease some of the guilt they carried for leaving him behind. Still, there were moments when Margaret caught them staring out the window, their faces clouded with sadness. She wished she could take away their pain, but she knew that healing would take time, for all of them. The town rallied around the family, offering support in small but meaningful ways. Neighbors brought meals, teachers gave the twins extra attention at school, and friends stopped by to check on them regularly. People wanted to believe in miracles, and the twins' return felt like proof that good could triumph over tragedy. But even as life moved forward, whispers of unease lingered. The mysterious woman buried in the heart plot remained unidentified, her presence haunting those who attended the funeral. No one could explain how or why she ended up in the coffin meant for William and his daughters. Margaret decided not to tell Lily and Grace about the ritual or the portal. She feared it would only confuse them further, adding another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming experience. Instead, she kept the wooden box locked away in a drawer, vowing never to use its power again. Yet late at night, when the house was silent and the weight of her loss pressed heavily on her chest, she sometimes opened the box and stared at the symbols inside. They reminded her of William's bravery and of the price he had paid. One evening, as Margaret sat alone in the living room flipping through an old photo album, she heard faint footsteps coming from upstairs. At first, she thought it was just her imagination. The house creaked and groaned often, especially at night, and she had grown used to the sounds. But these footsteps were different, steady and deliberate, as if someone were walking purposefully down the hallway. Her heart began to race. "Lily? Grace?" she called out, her voice trembling. Neither girl answered. They were staying at a friend's house for the weekend, leaving Margaret alone in the quiet house. Swallowing her fear, she stood up and grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen before heading upstairs. The footsteps led her to William's old bedroom, where the door stood slightly ajar. Pushing it open cautiously, she shone the light around the room. Everything looked exactly as it had been left. His clothes still hanging in the closet, his books stacked neatly on the shelves. Nothing seemed out of place, and yet the air felt different, heavier somehow, as if the room were holding its breath. Margaret stepped inside, her pulse quickening. As she moved toward the desk, something caught her eye, a faint glow emanating from the bottom drawer. Her hands shook as she pulled it open, revealing the wooden box she thought she'd hidden away safely downstairs. Its lid was cracked open, spilling soft golden light onto the floor. "What's going on?" she whispered, kneeling beside the drawer. The symbols etched into the box shimmered brightly, almost as if they were alive. Margaret reached out hesitantly, half expecting the box to burn her fingers, but when she touched it, the light dimmed, and the symbols faded back into their usual dull markings. For a moment, everything was still. Then, a low hum filled the room, growing louder until it vibrated in her bones. Margaret clutched the box, tightly, her mind racing. Was this some kind of warning, or was it William trying to reach her? Before she could decide what to do, the humming stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Margaret exhaled sharply, realizing she'd been holding her breath. She closed the drawer carefully and carried the box back downstairs, locking it once again in the kitchen drawer. But as she turned off the light and climbed into bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching. Her days passed without incident, and Margaret began to convince herself that the strange occurrence had been a fluke, a trick of the mind brought on by exhaustion and grief. She threw herself into helping Lily and Grace settle back into their routines, focusing on the present rather than dwelling on the past. The twins seemed to be adjusting well, laughing more and opening up to their friends again. Even Margaret found moments of peace, especially when she watched them play in the backyard or listened to their chatter during dinner. But then, little things started happening, things she couldn't ignore. Objects moved from one place to another overnight, even though no one else was in the house. A chair left at the kitchen table would appear pushed in perfectly straight the next morning. Grace's sketchbook, which she always kept on her desk, would turn up on the couch or in the hallway. At first, Margaret chalked it up to forgetfulness or coincidence. After all, everyone was still adjusting to life after such a traumatic event. Then came the dreams. Night after night, Margaret dreamed of William standing at the edge of a forest, beckoning her closer. His face was calm, but his eyes held a hint of urgency. In the dream, he never spoke, only gestured toward the trees as if urging her to follow. When she woke, she felt a mix of longing and dread, as though part of her wanted to obey while another part screamed to stay away. One night, unable to sleep, Margaret went downstairs to make tea. As she waited for the kettle to boil, she noticed a faint tapping sound coming from the window. Turning, she saw nothing outside but darkness. The tapping continued, rhythmic and insistent, until she finally opened the window to investigate. Gust of cold wind rushed in, carrying with it the scent of rain and earth. On the windowsill lay a single feather, white and iridescent, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Margaret picked it up, her fingers trembling. She didn't know what it meant, but she felt certain it was a message from William. Over the following weeks, more signs appeared. A flower bloomed in the middle of winter. Footprints appeared in freshly fallen snow, leading nowhere. And every so often, Margaret would catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye, only to turn and find nothing there. The twins noticed it too. One afternoon, as they sat together in the living room, Grace suddenly looked up from her sketchbook. "Do you ever feel like Dad's still here?" she asked quietly. Lily frowned, glancing around the room. "Yeah, like he's watching over us." Margaret froze, unsure how to respond. She wanted to tell them it was just their imaginations, that grief made people see things that weren't really there, but deep down she wasn't so sure anymore. Something or someone was definitely lingering nearby. That night, Margaret retrieved the wooden box from the drawer and placed it on the dining table. She stared at it for a long time, weighing her options. Part of her wanted to destroy it, to rid herself of the mystery and the memories it carried. But another part, the part that missed William desperately, knew she couldn't let go. Not yet. As she sat there, the symbols on the box began to glow softly, casting warm light across the room. Margaret took a deep breath and opened it, revealing the folded note inside. This time, instead of reading William's handwriting, she wrote her own message. "Thank you." She tucked the note back into the box and closed the lid, feeling a strange sense of closure wash over her. Whatever happened. Next, she knew William's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. He had given her the greatest gift imaginable, his daughters. And though she couldn't bring him back, she could honor his memory by living fully and loving deeply. As she turned off the light and headed upstairs, Margaret felt a gentle breeze brush against her cheek, carrying with it the faintest whisper, "You're welcome." From that night on, the strange occurrences stopped. The house settled into a peaceful quiet, and life in Maplewood continued as it always had. Margaret kept the wooden box locked away, a reminder of the bond that transcended worlds. And though she never saw William again, she often felt his presence, in the laughter of the twins, in the warmth of the sun, in the quiet moments when she least expected it. Maplewood may have been a small town, but its people carried big hearts. Together they learned that love doesn't end with death. It simply transforms, finding new ways to connect us to those we've lost. And for Margaret, Lily, and Grace, that connection would remain forever unbroken.